In this episode, we take a deeper look at how the CIS Controls V8 connect to the broader landscape of security standards and governance expectations that organizations operate under every day. When you are new to cybersecurity, the sheer number of frameworks can feel overwhelming. You may hear about NIST, ISO, industry regulations, internal policies, and board oversight, and it can sound like separate worlds competing for attention. The key insight is that these are not competing systems, but layered perspectives on the same goal: managing risk in a structured, defensible way. The CIS controls sit at the operational layer of that stack. When you understand how they map upward into governance and outward into standards, you gain the ability to reason clearly about alignment, coverage, and accountability. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at CyberAuthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. At the top of the stack are governance expectations. Governance is about direction, oversight, and accountability. It defines who is responsible for security, how risk decisions are made, and how performance is measured and reported. Governance frameworks typically describe outcomes rather than specific technical steps. They require organizations to manage risk, protect information, ensure continuity, and demonstrate due care. They speak the language of policy, risk tolerance, leadership oversight, and continuous improvement. What they often do not provide is a short, prioritized list of technical and operational actions that tell practitioners exactly what to implement first. That gap between strategy and execution is where the CIS controls provide clarity. When you look at a framework such as the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, NIST CSF, you see categories and subcategories organized into functions like identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. These functions describe what a mature cybersecurity program must be able to do. However, they are intentionally broad so that they can apply across industries and organizational sizes. The CIS controls translate those broad functions into concrete safeguards. For example, maintaining an accurate inventory of enterprise assets directly supports the identify function. Enforcing secure configurations and limiting administrative privileges support protect. Centralized logging and alert review support detect. When you understand this translation, you can quickly map a scenario-based question from a high-level governance requirement to a specific control action. The same layered relationship appears when you consider ISO IEC 27001. That standard is built around establishing an information security management system, which includes risk assessment, treatment plans, documented policies, leadership commitment, and continual improvement cycles. It includes an annex of controls, but it expects organizations to tailor those controls based on risk analysis. The CIS controls can function as a practical baseline within that management system. They provide a structured, prioritized set of safeguards that support the broader management requirements. On the exam, you may see a question asking how an organization can operationalize a high-level management system. The strongest answer usually reflects implementing measurable safeguards that align with the stated governance objectives. Regulatory and legal requirements add another layer. Data protection laws, financial regulations, and industry mandates often require organizations to protect sensitive data, limit access, monitor activity, and report incidents. These regulations rarely specify exact technical mechanisms because they must apply across diverse environments. Instead, they define obligations and expected outcomes. The CIS controls help organizations meet those obligations by providing actionable safeguards that can be documented and measured. For example, a regulation may require protection of personal data. Implementing access control safeguards, encryption practices, and monitoring mechanisms directly supports that requirement. On the exam, you are often being tested on whether you recognize that implementing well-defined safeguards is how organizations demonstrate reasonable security to regulators. A critical concept in mapping is alignment of intent. Governance frameworks and regulations express intent at a higher level. The CIS controls express intent at a more operational level. When you read a requirement that states organizations must ensure appropriate access management, the underlying intent is to reduce unauthorized access and misuse. The CIS safeguards related to account lifecycle management, authentication strength, and least privilege directly fulfill that intent. If you focus on intent rather than wording, you are less likely to be distracted by answer choices that sound formal but lack operational substance. The exam rewards this deeper understanding because it reflects real-world reasoning. Mapping is rarely a clean one-to-one relationship. A single governance requirement may be supported by multiple safeguards across different controls. Likewise, one safeguard may contribute to several governance objectives. Maintaining accurate asset inventories, for example, supports risk assessment, vulnerability management, incident response scoping, and audit reporting. This overlapping support is not redundancy. It reflects the interconnected nature of security. When answering exam questions, it is helpful to ask which option provides the most comprehensive alignment. The correct answer often supports multiple objectives simultaneously, rather than narrowly satisfying one dimension. Executive communication is another area where mapping becomes highly practical. Boards and senior leaders typically want to understand security posture in terms of risk exposure, compliance status, and strategic alignment. They may not be interested in the technical details of each safeguard. When an organization can show how its implementation of the CIS controls supports recognized frameworks and regulatory expectations, it creates a bridge between technical work and governance oversight. For example, reporting improved coverage across identify and protect categories while referencing aligned safeguards demonstrates structured progress. On the exam, questions about reporting or metrics often expect you to connect operational evidence to governance outcomes. Audit readiness further illustrates the importance of mapping. Auditors evaluate whether controls exist, operate effectively, and align with stated requirements. If an organization can clearly map its implemented safeguards to governance standards and regulatory criteria, audit processes become more straightforward and defensible. The measurable nature of the CIS controls supports this traceability. Instead of vague claims about good security practices, organizations can present documented inventories, configuration baselines, and access reviews as evidence. When you encounter exam questions about demonstrating compliance or satisfying an auditor, the correct reasoning usually involves measurable safeguards tied to governance intent. It is also important to recognize that organizations often face multiple frameworks simultaneously. A company might align with NIST CSF for strategic risk management, use ISO IEC 27001 for certification, and comply with industry regulations at the same time. Rather than implementing entirely separate control sets for each requirement, organizations map them to a unified operational baseline. The CIS controls frequently serve as that baseline because of their clarity and prioritization. This integrated approach reduces duplication and ensures consistent coverage. In exam scenarios, when presented with competing requirements, the best answer often reflects harmonization through structured control implementation rather than parallel, disconnected efforts. Language translation between governance and operations is a skill in itself. Governance documents often use terms like assurance, oversight, accountability, and risk tolerance. Operational control models use terms like safeguards, baselines, monitoring, and remediation. When you can fluently translate between these vocabularies, you demonstrate mature understanding. For example, accountability at the governance level translates into clearly assigned control ownership at the operational level. Risk tolerance at the board level translates into prioritized implementation of safeguards based on threat likelihood and impact. Exam questions may deliberately shift vocabulary to test whether you can see through wording differences to the underlying concept. Another deeper dimension of mapping involves maturity and scalability. Governance frameworks often expect continual improvement and evolving capability. The CIS controls support this through structured implementation groups and measurable safeguards. An organization might begin with foundational safeguards and progressively enhance monitoring, automation, and reporting as it matures. This progression demonstrates alignment with governance expectations for improvement without overwhelming resources. On the exam, you may encounter questions that test proportionality. The correct answer usually reflects selecting safeguards appropriate to organizational size and risk rather than adopting overly complex solutions prematurely. When you step back, mapping reveals a layered architecture of security responsibility. Governance sets direction and expectations. Standards define structured requirements. Regulations impose legal obligations. The CIS controls provide prioritized, measurable safeguards that operationalize all of the above. Each layer reinforces the others. If governance exists without operational controls, it becomes theoretical. If controls exist without governance, they may lack accountability and oversight. If regulations exist without structured implementation, compliance becomes superficial. Understanding this layered relationship allows you to reason across levels quickly and confidently. As you prepare for the exam, practice moving between these layers intentionally. Take a high-level governance statement and ask which safeguards directly support it. Then take a safeguard and ask which broader objectives it advances. This bidirectional thinking strengthens conceptual flexibility. Under exam time pressure, flexibility helps you interpret scenarios accurately and select answers that demonstrate true alignment rather than surface-level compliance. The certification is not testing your ability to memorize framework language. It is testing your ability to connect operational practice with governance purpose. In conclusion, mapping the CIS controls to major security standards and governance expectations transforms a potentially confusing landscape into a structured, layered system. Governance frameworks articulate what must be achieved. Standards formalize structure and oversight. Regulations define obligations. The CIS controls translate all of these into prioritized, measurable actions. When you understand how these pieces align, you are better equipped to interpret exam questions that require strategic reasoning, operational clarity, and awareness of accountability. More importantly, you develop a mental model that reflects how real organizations build defensible, aligned, and resilient security programs in practice.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.